Joe, we continue on our deep dives, and this time we go to Virginia. Not the Cavaliers. We're going to Virginia Tech.
Hokies.
The Hokies.
What is a Hokie?
It's a turkey.
I know, I'm joking. It's a very commonly said thing, and never mind.
I'll never forget this as long as I live. I have a really good friend, David Hofstetter, and his dad, God rest his soul. We were talking about the LSU game when we were in high school at David's house, and he said, David said, "Wait, they're playing Virginia Tech this weekend," or somebody said that. I'm like, "Yeah, the Hokies." And his dad, big burly guy, was like, "Hey, what's a husky?" And I goes, "It's a turkey." And he points at me, like to say, like he thought that he was going to stump my sports knowledge of what their mascot was. Okay, that's when I knew I'd have a college football podcast. Nevertheless, we go to Virginia Tech. And another edition of our deep dives here. Joe, I'll kick it off to you. I got to admit, defensively, the film kind of blew me away a little bit at times. Yeah. There was one area that I thought got roughed up a little bit, but Joe, they attacked. They went after dudes. 3 guys. There's only one other team besides Virginia Tech that had 3 guys with double-digit tackle for loss on the season. It was Michigan. The Michigan Wolverines, the national champion. This defense, and then when you look at what they did statistically, Joe, I don't know if Virginia Tech's not a team that we might need to talk about.
Well, that's why we're talking about them. Quick note before I give my thoughts on this team. Virginia Tech, probably the coolest stadium I've gotten to play in when I was playing at Rhode Island.
Okay.
Played them not a couple years ago. That was 2019. God damn, that was forever ago. That was 5 goddamn years ago.
You were a senior when Joe Burrow was absolutely lighting everybody up?
Yes. I was in college at the same time that Joe Burrow was, but he was a few years older than me, I think. But regardless, also technically a Hokie fan because my brother went there, his fiance went there, they met there at Virginia Tech, so I'm indirectly some relationship here why I forced us to talk about them.
Okay.
I do think, though, that when we look at this Virginia Tech team, ball knowers know that the Hokies have a really good roster. They've got a really good defense, and more importantly, Brent Pry, we forget a couple of years ago, was one of the best defensive coordinators in the country, good enough to earn himself an ACC job, taking over for one of the most historic coaches in all of college football in Frank Beamer. He takes over. This defense has slowly gotten better. You mentioned the production that they have, but the big reason why I am high on them, not to be a playoff team, but why they could be a 9-win team in 2024 is because of Kyron Drones, who in the last 4 games of the season, their offensive production exploded to the point where they were averaging 43 points per game, and Drones had 151 passes without an interception in a stretch during the season. So I look at all of that, the fact that the offensive line returns all of their starters plus 122 career starts amongst all of those guys and also some of their backups. This team is experienced in the right spots, and Kyron Drones is a great mix of athlete, accurate, explosive passer like we saw in the final 4 games. If that version of him shows up for this entire 2024 season, I think that the Hokies are going to be that team that will piss off and annoy some of the top teams in the ACC and potentially knock off some of them.
I still question how explosive they are on the outside. I know Hokie fans are going to kill me on that. You didn't have a receiver that went over 700 yards. I know that Drones down the stretch had some really good production. Can he develop and take that next step? I think is what everybody wants to know here. Now, his name did come up, if you remember, Joe, some when we were talking about kids that may hit the portal. Remember when Auburn didn't get a dual threat type of kid? Drones was a guy that people thought that can go in there. Joe, I'm a little wary, though, a 58.2% completion percentage guy, but I do like the decision-making. So what is it? Okay. I don't know if it's decision-making because the kid did not turn the ball over a lot, like hardly at all. Was very efficient at not turning the ball over. I do question accuracy. Okay. Down the stretch, he was a little bit better, but can he take that next step? I think is going to be the big thing for them. Where I look at them, though, look, I can look at the entire offense and say I think they'll have a really good running game. I don't know how well they'll throw the ball, but Joe, if you can run it and play good defenses, which I think that they're going to do, might be a pretty big deal here for the Hokies down the stretch. Joe, like I mentioned, only two teams had 3 players with 10 tackles for loss or more. But look, man, you're bringing back so much production. Powell returns. He had 9.5 sacks last year, 14.5 tackles for loss. You bring in Jenkins, Payne. All those guys had double-digit tackle for loss. So when I look at them, not Payne, Perry, excuse me, from Alabama. So when you look at them, I just asked the solid question, are they Louisville of last year? Could they be a team that at the end, well, technically they're playing for it. Like technically you got to keep an eye on them because, look, they upset Notre Dame. They do all these things. What happens with them is going to be a big question mark.
I also, one of the guys that they brought in that I'm a very, very big fan of, Aeneas Peebles, who they brought in from Duke. We knew that Duke defensive line was really good, and he was one of the key contributors on that D line. So they bolstered a unit that was already really strong for them by bringing in Peebles. It just feels like the right mix of things where maybe they're not elite in every single in any category, but they're just really strong and consistent. I think the way that you're explaining it, where they could be Louisville, where they upset a team, maybe they have a silly loss that they weren't supposed to, which Louisville did last year, and then they can be knocking on the door of the ACC championship game. I don't think that they're going to be a playoff team. I just don't. And you mentioned there with Drones where he did have some games where he was really accurate, and then there were some games where he was all over the map.
Yeah, no idea what you were going to get game to game. Highly inconsistent.
If he's more consistent, I think a lot of it is going to come down to that. But if we're talking schedule here, their schedule is extremely favorable. They're one of the ACC teams that got a really easy schedule for them. I just had it pulled up. Hold on one second. They open with Vanderbilt, though, which that's a nice little SEC win that they get to throw on the board. They play Marshall.
Don't underestimate the Commodores.
They shut up. They travel to Old Dominion. Oh, I thought that was a Marshall joke. I realized that's not what you were trying to do. They have Rutgers at home. They travel to Miami, which is going to be a tough game for them. They have to go to Stanford, which is tough to go cross country. Boston College at home. Virginia Tech at home, which I think they're going to beat. They go to Syracuse in the Dome. Clemson at home, which is a huge, huge deal that they get to play them at home. At Duke, and then Virginia at home. There's really only 2 tough matchups, and they benefit from the fact that Clemson's on their own turf. 9-3, man. 9-3 makes a lot of sense.
Why do you think Colin Shalee comes in, the quarterback from UCLA? Now, if you remember,
they need depth. It's not because they're very high on Drones.
I know that they are, but it's I don't. Maybe you're right about the depth piece. I do think that that's very interesting. I look at their schedule. You brought up Clemson. We're going to continue to do this with Clemson, dude. You know what I keep saying? You know what I was thinking when you talked about Clemson? God, dog, we didn't look at their schedule like it was going to be tough. We keep bringing them up. Well, if they can beat Clemson. Well, if they can beat Clemson.
Yeah.
Well, if they can beat Clemson. I'm just saying I think it bolsters Clemson if you continue to have these wins against teams that we think that could have some production. So you can only bring up Clemson so much now because every ACC team that we have brought up, and we did a deep dive on Clemson, you keep bringing them up there. So just a little side piece for the Tigers. I agree with you. I do question, their run defense. Now, I talked pretty glowingly about them. Joe, 57th in the country last year in run defense, I don't think is great. I think they got better after the passer. They made a lot of explosive plays. The question becomes, is we're thinking, is this going to be the defense that takes the next step, right? Are they going to be the team like, damn, dude, them old Virginia Tech teams that had really good defense, they're pretty freaking good. Yeah, but you got run on heavy bit. You got some dudes that are coming in from the portal. The thing, though, is what they've done in the secondary is the biggest thing that nobody's talking about. Joe, 4th in the country last year in passing yards allowed. Dude, they're locking dudes down. So I look at that Clemson game as you bring up a lockdown secondary against Cade Klubnik. That's the thought that I had. Okay, was that you have a quarterback that, man, if there's pretty good press-to-press man coverage, y'all are in trouble. Cade Klubnik might be in trouble, and that game's at home. So that's when I start building my confidence, ironically, around the this Virginia Tech team.
And we had a conversation about Dorian Strong before this. He was one of the best corners in the country. Very experienced. He's a graduate
Number one
student.
in the ACC in passes, defenses, second in the ACC in interceptions.
Yeah, I really think that their secondary is going to be a strong suit for them. But what really does come back to all of this, and why I really like what Virginia Tech brings to the table in 2024, is that they have a defensive-minded head coach that is a brilliant defensive mind.
Mm-hmm.
It was long enough ago where I think we kind of forget how good Brent Pry was, especially because of Manny Diaz, how good they were under him. He was better than they were under Brent Pry, but Brent Pry had a really damn good Penn State defense when he was there. And you can see that they're slowly building towards becoming that. You know, they're slowly working their way towards becoming diverse.
Look, man, I don't know if I have no clue. And this is Virginia Tech fans are going to say, Blake, what in the hell are you talking about? We knew about this guy. Joe, we did our top 10 like edge rushers, defensive linemen. Dude, there's nobody that has the production of Anquan Powell. No, nobody.
And Antoine Powell.
Antoine Powell.
Ryland.
What did I say? Anquan? Yeah. Antoine Powell.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm finding a sleeper in the rough that I can tell my buddies about around the water cooler, pun and none intended, but around the water cooler, that might be the thing. Hey, man, you better watch out for this Powell kid that's at Virginia Tech because he is very explosive. He's really good. So 14 and a half tackles for loss is pure insanity.
And you're bringing up a good point here, where like a lot of, from a national perspective, Virginia Tech
that's what
wasn't on our radar.
National,
yeah, you're
right. I didn't end the piece there. We're not talking about him nationally. I feel like I'm like from a big time standpoint, he's not being talked about. But continue. I'm sorry for.
Well, all I was gonna say is like it's the same boat for me. I knew about drones. I knew about Dorian Strong, but for some reason there hasn't been any national coverage for Antoine Powell Ryland. And this is why I like us doing this series that we do from June to the middle of August, where we get to, this is our way of getting ready for the season. It's doing our notes and learning about these teams and then sharing what we've found and researched to our listeners. And I'm curious to figure out more about this kid. Like I want to actually break down his tape because the production that you're mentioning,
he explodes on tape, bro. I mean, you can't have that many tackles for loss and not be an explosive dude. By the way, Florida transfer.
He was at Florida.
Yeah.
I just texted a good friend of the show, Ryan Roberts, to see if he's watched his tape or not.
Okay.
I've seen nobody talk about this kid.
I want to know what we're missing. Back to their defense. Look, Kelly Lawson, had 80 tackles last year, 2.5 tackles for loss, or 2 sacks, 2.5 sacks, 7.5 tackles for loss. Look, they're just stacked, man. I mean, when you got a really good back seven, Joe, you can be in any game in today's league. Can they fix the leaks that they had at times in the running game? You bring in some guys. Joe, I think here's the biggest thing for them defensively, though. Nine dudes are seniors, or redshirted juniors that are on their 2 deep or starters. So their backups are dudes that have experience. They've been around the block. And what do we say every year, man? Okay, yeah, you have the Caleb Downses of the world. Well, why was Nick's defense so good this year? He had some really good players. Okay, true. He had a shitload of seniors too, a shitload of older guys that had been there. So bottom line for me is if there's a team in the ACC, I think I might be convinced. Defensively, I know that they're going to give you something. Joe, it comes down to offensively. What can they do?
Here's the only thing. Are they as good as we think that they could be, or are they Illinois?
Ju-
Which I fell victim
But
to
see,
this
here's the
last year, where
problem
I
with
got
Illinois.
excited. I got excited about they didn't have a guy at quarterback like Virginia Tech does.
That's
They
where
were
I was gonna
stepping
go.
in. Yeah, they were stepping in with Altmaier, and he was a bit shaky, very inconsistent. They lost a good bit in their secondary, so it was a little different. But all I'm saying is
Well,
that
and they lost dudes on their D line too.
not their two biggest, most important players were coming back at Illinois, though. There was good reason for
Oh yeah,
Illinois
that
to be
was why
good
you were
last
so
year.
high on them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Jerjon Newton and Keith Randolph were unbelievable on tape going into the season, and it made a lot of sense. But injuries caught up to them; they had a lot of issues. All I'm saying here is that I don't think it'll happen, but that is the opposite end of the spectrum with Virginia Tech. Is that they could just be another Illinois, where you felt really good about them at the end of the season. You were getting really excited and hyped up about the expectations, and everything looks great. And then it just fizzles out and doesn't come to
Yeah,
fruition.
but that good corner that you had is back.
Right.
I mean, Joe, I don't know. And by the way, you know what else? I think that ironically, I can't believe, well, maybe I am. You know, we talk about Virginia Tech. Well, they just don't have the dudes that they used to. They just went and got a couple from the portal that nobody's talking about. Literally. Virginia Tech is a team that nobody's talking about. I'm telling you, they might be the sleeper. I agree with you, though. Can they? If they progress offensively, they're going to be fine.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.